Thank you everybody for your patience. Again, this is the Sudo Talks webinar series. Look forward to more Sudo Talks next year. And as I mentioned, if you're interested in participating in any or want to be part of one, let us know. We're happy to kind of talk about that more and see what we can discuss and share with the community to try and help others. All right. So my name is Nicholas Ponce. I lead the ops and security teams here at Adigy. You can find me in MacAdmin Slack under the handle @Ponce, or the private Adigy channel where Nicholas Ponce, heavily available in both those channels. And for those who are in the MSP community, we have a MSP Geek Slack channel if you're in that as well. So definitely check us out in these different communities. And then when my colleague is here, I'll let him introduce himself. But thank you guys, and it was a great 2022.
Hi everyone. Oh, I think I'm muted. Oh,
no, you're good.
We're good. Cool. Hi everyone. My name is Nathan Pavone. I am a security engineer here at Adigy. Been here for I think over 2 years now. I handle anything related to security and compliance here at the company, and I'm excited to talk more about the macOS, intrusion or like forensics best practices and things of that nature.
Yeah, whatever this topic was that was voted on, I read it.
I was like blanking for a moment, like what are we?
Apple forensics best practice. Again, this topic was actually chosen by the community. Really cool topic. We're going to get into a few different scenarios in it. But again, shout out to the community who chose this specific topic to do on the webinar. This is actually the second community-driven webinar via Sudo Talks I think we've done. So keep the recommendations coming if there's specific things you guys want to learn. So with that said, I'm going to go through the beginning section of this stuff here, including the agenda, and then I'll hand it over to Nathan and we'll do some live demos and forensic analysis here. So really quickly, we'll do a quick introduction. Most of you know either Nathan or myself or Adigy really well, but we're going to cover some basic preliminary information. And we'll talk about detection, alerting, responding to threats, forensic analysis, triaging issues, which aligns with the threat response, and then logs of interest of things that we commonly look at and things that might be interesting to kind of see or work through. So we'll go straight into it. We're going to cover, how we can assist with research investigations with your security tool of choice. We're going to be using a third-party tool, security tool in some of these examples. So you will see us reference that. We'll cover research analysis, but if you're doing this on your own, please make sure you do it in a sandbox environment, or if you're actually testing or playing with malware samples, please use caution with them. Use virtual machines, sandbox devices, etc., off-network items, just for precaution. And last but not least, Adigy is not a security tool itself. We can be used to enforce security controls, compliance, assist in investigations, but we are not an antivirus or anti-malware solution or an endpoint detection and response solution. While we can be used in some forms of that, we are not a true replacement for that. And we would defer to those vendors for those immediate needs. All right. So detection and alerting, this is probably where those security tools come into play the most, because you don't know what you don't know. Having a security tool or even Adigy really helps you identify anomalies or things that are suspicious or even valid threats. Apple does have some native security tools we talk about quite often, the MRT, malware removal tool, things like that, but by and large, they're passive, meaning, Apple will release a fix and then at that point, it just, it will just remediate that malware or prevent that malware from running. But there's no real actionable items for the IT admin or the end user when Apple usually does this stuff. We recommend using a separate real-time protection tool at a minimum for all your macOS devices. We like to call ourselves a real-time device management platform, one of the few out there that incorporates an MDM natively. So real-time is important because you need to know about especially security risks or threats rather quickly. Next week is usually not good enough for real-time events. So there's many security tools out there. We've in Adigy helped deploy, I don't know, quite a bit. I'm not going to name every vendor and advertise them, but we don't have a specific favorite. There are some that work better than others. There are some that are less performance driven than others, so they take less performance, or some take more performance, and you get a little bit more real-time monitoring, if you will. It really depends on your preference, your business, your customers, whatever the case may be. Every user tends to be unique, but some endpoint protection tools should be deployed. All right. So in this case, we're going to be talking about Malwarebytes a lot. We have an integration with Malwarebytes. It makes it really, really, really easy to deploy. It's not too performance heavy on the devices from our experience, but it sends you alerts on threats, detections, malware, suspicious activity, a plethora of different information that you may not even know is happening. So here's an example of a Malwarebytes detection from suspicious activity. If you're familiar with Objective-C, that's Patrick Wardle's company. He runs a really cool nonprofit organization for macOS security. He runs an event as well called Objective by the Sea that happens annually, and they do security conferences. That whole seminar, and including threat hunting exercises and drills. Pretty cool. Definitely check it out if you haven't. Either way, this suspicious activity was raised by Malwarebytes, and it was actually one of his tools called Oversight. Oversight is a mechanism to tell you who is using your webcam. It's a pretty interesting solution. It's great to know if some tool that you don't know why is turning on your webcam and maybe not turning it off. Nevertheless, this alert was triggered in Malwarebytes, and we had to look into it as to whether this was a serious threat or not, or a serious,
false positive.
Yeah, false positive or not. In this case, we're familiar with the tool. We're actually familiar with the developer, and can even report this to Malwarebytes and Patrick himself to kind of see, if there's something that should be done better here. But essentially, you can see the command line that was executed was launch ctl unload and his uninstall helper plist. So, it was just unloading a launch daemon. Launch daemons have definitely gotten a lot of attention this year with the release of macOS Ventura. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, now in macOS Ventura, any login item, which is usually a launch daemon or a launch agent, will prompt the user that is running on the device now. Anything that gets created in that form or fashion. It's really good for security and visibility of what's being deployed on devices. But a lot of these things, the end user doesn't even understand what they are or what they can do. And this includes Malwarebytes itself, which deploys a launch daemon, and Adigy as well, that deploys a launch daemon. So all these tools will deploy launch daemons. They may or may not even know these things are there. So Apple made a deliberate change for security posture to make these launch daemons visible and raise the awareness, because this is a way of getting persistence foothold of the device, right? You can put a launch daemon there, and it'll always run this process when you turn on the device, and will always run that malware or suspicious process when you're running. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out for. But this is just an example of kind of alerts we will get. There are some other alerts that tend to be through suspicious activities that may flag false positives. we'll talk a lot about false positives and how to rule those out and correlate them. But here's a great example of kind of a way to monitor these things. We'll talk about how you can monitor them in Adigy as well. And if something changes, letting you know and getting those notifications and alerts when appropriate. All right, let's continue here. Here's another detection alert, and this was right around the release of Ventura, actually. And we knew exactly what this was. This is a process actually is called the Mobile Software Update Brain Service. This is a new software update service Apple launched right around the end of Big Sur, beginning of Monterey, and continue iterating it in Ventura to do MDM updates. At the very beginning, it was causing all sorts of broken account related update issues. So yeah, it is a fairly new service, and Malwarebytes was not, I imagine, was not aware of kind of, what was going on here. And it detected this suspicious activity because it never saw this type of activity before. It's a new service from macOS, but you can pretty confidently say that this was a software update performed by MDM because it was using our new MDM software updates beta feature. So examples of false positives that you might get regularly are native OS processes. For example, this one right here is a native OS process. Management tools like antivirus, backup, MDM even are the agents themselves, mainly because these tools can access protected resources in some cases or perform actions specific to their programs or tooling. Which may trigger suspicious notifications or threat detections, etc. And last but not least, sometimes a false positive is just normal user behavior, right? The user just don't do things the way people normally do, or they found some article online that they Googled and thought it was a good idea to perform. And sometimes
some software.
Yeah. All right, and I see some questions coming in. So I'm gonna try and answer them the best I can. Nathan will probably tackle some as they come in as well. And I see one was a great question. Do we have a KB article with the binaries and directories that should be trusted by the endpoint protection office? And we do. Nathan, if you don't mind shooting that article when you can there.
Yeah.
Now we're generally saying these are false positives usually. These are the main culprits for the false positive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a false positive, right? We're going to talk about some of the commands next to track down suspicious reports to validate their activity. So here's like a checklist of things that you want to check when looking at Mac OS device. Specifically, we check these when we're trying to track down why something is happening or whose process is it. We did a really cool exercise of a real life example from a previous antivirus company that was laying down a file on a machine that did not make sense. And we had to look through kind of all these different tools and our toolings or configurations, but specifically we used FS usage to track, what binary was doing it. And that pointed us to a launch daemon. And that launch daemon was actually created by a specific vendor that let us know that it was that antivirus creating this file on all their machines. And the file had a name of another vendor that they didn't use, and they didn't understand why this was happening. So using these commands really, really, really helps, or looking at this information, I should say, really, really helps you identify if there's something suspicious or off on the machine. Launch agents and launch daemons, we just talked about those, and they get flagged very often for suspicious activity. Now, again, in Ventura, these are prompting the end users. You can manage this with an MDM profile, so they don't, it will still prompt them, unfortunately, but it will just say that a managed login item was deployed from your system administrator. Essentially, it won't tell them exactly what third-party agent or daemon was deployed. It will also prevent them from disabling that launch agent or launch daemon themselves. We do this with a couple of our tools already. Our agent gets whitelisted, our Malwarebytes gets whitelisted, etc. And I'll show that in just a minute here. The MDM profiles, whoops, can also be a point of contention or persistence on the device. They could deploy a profile that does something to the device that could potentially have something malicious in it. Cron jobs, kernel extensions, which are deprecated. I'm not going to go too far into them. We do have a community fact or a default device fact for that. Periodics, which is a way of scheduling a periodic task to run. It's another way of persistence. Log in, log out hooks. And then the rest are just commands you can run through live terminal, which make it really easy to debug issues when you're having them, see what is running on a device. It's the equivalent, these commands are the equivalent of almost opening activity monitor and looking at all the files and ports that something is touching. If you see a process that is running, that is suspicious, you can run these commands to essentially determine what they're being used by, essentially. So, all right. Here are some of our default alerts that really help us determine suspicious behavior or things that should be on that should not be off, or things that got modified. Admin users modified. All these are default monitoring items you should have either in your environment, or you should be able to copy them down from the community. I think Wild Pressure Malware Monitor is a community fact that you can copy down, but the rest should be in it. Yeah, Nathan actually created that one. The rest of them actually are default ones, and admin users modified is a great one because if someone modified your admin users, like if a new admin user was created or an existing one was modified. Obviously, if file vault is disabled, the encryption is off. You don't want the end user's data to be exposed in any way. Firewall, it's the native macOS firewall. It's a one-way firewall, but it's still better than nothing, so we would definitely recommend it. Obviously, Gatekeeper is a big one that will prevent untrusted applications from being installed, or applications that aren't signed or notarized. IP change detected is a big one for us as well. That might not fit for everybody, but it can rule out the impossible travel scenario, or if the device is stolen, it might give you a new public IP. Remote desktop enabled is one that you would use during remote management, or the screen sharing, which gets enabled via remote management. We use this for live desktop, but you can also turn it off when not needed. You can also build a monitoring remediation to auto do that. And the same thing with SSH if remote login is enabled. And the time zone change also is important for remote impossible travel. And there's a few other community facts I think you built, Nathan, that are also malware monitors. Or look for malware on devices.
Yeah, we try to be up to date when it comes to any kind of malware that's persisting on macOS devices on a wide scale. As of late, it's been relatively quiet. There hasn't been anything new, but there was a period of time during the pandemic where there was like new malware like every other month. So we're trying to like keep updated with those, reading the reports regarding their behavior and seeing if there's any kind of facts that we can develop that would mitigate this risk. But we are not a security company. That's just something that we like to do.
Yeah, we actually have, if you're interested, when we do have these things, we actually create security bulletins. So we will post to addergy.com/trust about if there's any serious malware threats out there, and if we can build community facts to help you guys with them, we will do so. So keep an eye out for anything from /trust when we send it out, because it most likely will have some sort of security ramification. And we really only do that, to be clear, like when there's a malware threat that we can assist with. If it's something that like Apple already patched or is working on, or is just a native system problem, we probably won't create a fact for that. It's something we try and evaluate on a case-to-case basis. Okay. I guess one more thing on that note. If we have seen in certain cases where we can conflict with antivirus tools or security solutions. I know I've helped a couple people that were using a security solution that flagged that, Adigy was flagging a malware. And it was really just the fact was checking for the presence of the malware, which was flagging the antivirus solution. So sometimes if you don't have an antivirus solution or you don't have any endpoint security solutions on the macOS devices, it's beneficial to put these on here and have something. But if you already have an endpoint security solution, you may want to, evaluate which ones you put on here, because some of them will be duplicated or redundant, if you will, with the existing endpoint security solution.
Might create unnecessary noise on your endpoint security solution, but yeah, even like, what was it? Some security tools might flag just like regular Adigy processes, or just end up analyzing every single thing that it does and may cause a performance issue. Like that's why we have this article regarding, and I replied to Ross's question for exclusion recommendations for antivirus and anti-malware that you may use on your devices. So it's just all the plists that we use, the binaries that we use as well, and some other files that are critical for Adigy functionality.
Yeah. All right, let's go on here. All right, threat response. So obviously there's two types of, responses, right? One's a false positive. We can let the user know, hey, we looked at it. It doesn't seem like a legitimate threat. But we're still going to do a full investigation to kind of confirm that and let them know, etc. And the second one is the actual legitimate threat. So usually what we recommend is as soon as you get a report, start collecting information, logs. We'll talk more about what to collect and where and how later on in the presentation. But if you have a SOC or a security operations center or a security team, definitely get them involved sooner rather than later. If it's needed, contact law enforcement. That's usually the recommendation for most ransomware attacks. Contact law enforcement. They're here to help. They can even maybe give you an encryption key. Do not
decryption key.
Decryption key. Sorry,
if there is one.
Yeah. I would not try and contact the ransomware contacts themselves.
Yeah.
There is.
I should go without saying.
There was a really good, if you're into podcasts, I'm going to recommend the podcast that talked about a recent incident that you guys may have definitely all heard of, at least most of the guys here, probably because it very much relates to us. In the MSP sector, there was a pretty large incident where Kaseya was used for a ransomware attack. Actually, Kaseya was the vector of the ransomware attack. I'm not going to go into why or how, etc. Maybe over a couple of beers on another night, but I'm going to plug here I'm going to put in the chat the Darknet Diaries podcast, episode 126. Our Evil will give you some very enlightening information about that scenario. According to that podcast, they actually contacted the FBI,
Yeah.
and the FBI directly helped them get a decryption key. Coincidentally, they've been working on decryption keys. They just aren't advertising it, because as soon as they advertise it, the ransomware developers will just change the encryption mechanism so that it's slightly different, and it no longer works. I would always try and reach out to law enforcement immediately and see what they say first, as opposed to trying to reach out to the ransomware vendors themselves. I call them vendors because they even have a support team that will help you pay. Ben, to your point, that will help you learn Bitcoin. I set up a wallet and pay them through Bitcoin, because most people don't know how that works, and they will have a team that answers as like a support service and will help you walk through the ransomware payment. Now, again, our recommendations, you guys are definitely open to kind of pursuing it however you need to, but this is, again, our recommendations of how you should proceed with it. Again, contact law enforcement first in those scenarios would be our recommendation. All right. So what do I collect from the device for a deeper investigation, forensic analysis, or incident response team? Logs. The most important, Nathan's going to go through a bunch of log commands. You can start with the sysdiagnose if you're familiar with that. Always get the devices impacted. I know some of us manage multiple customers or multiple organizations, or our company is a series of different companies together. Knowing exactly what group of devices, whether it was like a specific office that was infected, or an individual, that really helps to identify the scope, right? Like if it's one device, you may not want to contact law enforcement. You may. Really depends on, the severity and
Depends on
threat.
the scope and severity. Yeah.
The type of threat, right? So like if all the files are encrypted, we can safely assume it's ransomware, right? But just trying to identify what type of threat, at least what you're seeing from the threat, the date of the infection, or the date and time of the infection, the date and time of the detection. Obviously, all these help to put together a clearer picture of what happened for whoever's going to pick up the investigation next, whether it's federal authorities, security department, a SOC, etc. Having that information is critical, because even if it's a false positive, you can still show that report or the findings of the investigation to the vendor and say, hey, look, we spent 2 days researching this what appeared to be malware, and it's actually your software. Here's everything we did, and maybe we can come to like a solution here as to like, so it doesn't trip off our sensors, our endpoint detection tools, etc.
Chances are it's affecting someone else too.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not the only one.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, let me see. We're going to go into the forensic analysis piece, but really kind of going back here, all these things I'm just going to highlight really quickly, Nathan, before I turn over to you. Most of these things you can actually find in Adigy, and you can actually set up monitoring items for them. So like launch agents and daemons, you can type agents and you'll see all the third-party agents on this device. And the same thing with the daemons. So you can monitor for new ones. You can monitor, anything you want on any of these. It's all completely monitorable. Now, let's say you were actually working on a device that was impacted and you wanted to check out kind of what was going on. You could start the live terminal session. You'll be able to kind of access the machine. Here's an example of SS usage. It'll actually it'll tell you every single thing that's going on. So some of these, especially LSOF and netstat, FS usage, and sometimes the processes, can be overwhelming. You don't necessarily understand what's happening here. I think the best bet is to try and find a clue as to what is being logged that is of concern, and getting some sort of keyword, some sort of identifier, some sort of flag that says like this shouldn't be here. In the case of that we were working with the other vendor, they were writing a file to all their machines called Jamf. It's like, what? We don't use that solution. I don't understand where this is coming from. So, you can always run these commands through the live terminal, or use the monitoring tool, or even the devices page to get that information, and then add like a grep filter to kind of look for that file name or whatever might be happening on that device. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Nathan now. He's gonna go through some forensic analysis and kind of show you some other commands that you can use to
Yeah.
debug these devices and find different information that's meaningful.
Yeah. So just getting a little bit into like the forensic analysis side of things. Typically when it comes to these types of intrusions or like ransomware attacks and things of that nature, you want to be able to like, aside from this, isolate the actual device or set of devices that are impacted, assuming it's not all of them, and being able to conduct that analysis that was mentioned previously, such as looking into like files that are being opened, files that are being used, ports that are being opened that are out of the ordinary, any launch agents and launch daemons, things like that. And in particular, if you can actually identify the malware itself, you can collect that and use it as a sample and conduct your own analysis on a separate machine that you can actually do more work on. And that's more so in the sense that you would be doing that sort of analysis in a virtualized environment or like a virtual machine. So the idea is that you would isolate this from production environments, and before doing any proper analysis, you take a snapshot of the VM so that you're able to go back or roll back after actually infecting the device if you're doing dynamic analysis or things of that nature. Additionally, when you're actually getting this malware onto the device, either download it to a dedicated folder on your machine or something like that. To avoid unintentional infection, maybe password protected zip file is usually the best course of action. I know Objective-C has a lot of malware samples to work with, and that's kind of what they do. And you should either transfer it to the virtualized environment itself, either by downloading it directly to it or just like or any other means that which you can transfer it to that file system. And also importantly, be sure to isolate that virtual machine from the rest of the network or production network. Now, there may be cases where you want to do analysis that would require a network connection. There are particular ways to do this, but it actually depends on your infrastructure and whatever hypervisor you are using. But if that's not absolutely necessary, you can definitely conduct analysis with a virtual network that is completely separate from that of the host machine and from that of the production environment. That's usually how I go about like conducting these types of analyses so that we can come up with potential remediation if there's something that we can do on our end, such as those that are seen in some of the articles that I've written in the trust page on adigy.com. Let's go to the next thing on triaging, which is just a little bit of a reiteration from what was mentioned previously. So this is for the case of an incident, like such as a compromised part of the infrastructure. Well, specifically the infrastructure would be macOS devices or ransomware. Next slide. So, just be sure to provide as much detail in the report as you possibly can, especially using some of the command line tools that were mentioned previously, and getting as much detail that would be particularly useful for an investigative team, whether that investigative team is in-house or external, such as law enforcement or SOC, as previously mentioned. And these incidents, whether it's one incident or multiples of incidents, should be triaged in order of severity. and impact for investigation. And another thing that should be considered is the functional and informational impact of the incident itself. So for example, if an incident can disrupt, like in the case of ransomware, just like disrupts the entire business workflow, that should be taken into consideration. And if it's more informational, is in the case of like stolen data, that should also be taken into consideration to see which ones should be tackled first. Because in certain cases, some attacks are usually more sophisticated and might actually just be multitude of things rather than just one simple thing. Depends how much of a target you are, and usually, yeah, pretty big attacks like ones with Kaseya, as mentioned earlier, kind of sophisticated in how they went about that. So next, I'll go a little bit more on some of the logs of interest that may be useful for an investigation. This is not an exhaustive list, but it is some interesting things that I found when I was researching more into how Apple manages like their unified logging system. Previously, Apple used to use something a little bit more familiar to those who use our Linux systems like Ubuntu or Debian on a daily basis. It's more like syslog. So it's just simple like text files that you can just grep for the information that you're looking for, tail if you want to see like live updates. But Apple has their own unique system that is actually a little bit difficult to wrap your head around for a lot of people. But luckily, we can just go through each thing that we're looking for just by using the log show command. And here are like a few things that I wanted to show here. So you can look for like usages of the sudo command, usages of su, login attempts, SSH attempts, and also screen sharing authentication requests, each of which may be useful in investigation depending on the nature of the intrusion itself. Next slide. So here is one example, the sudo command usage is using the log show command in the last day or so, because sometimes you want to filter it by time and you don't actually want to just get every single instance of something. And here, the predicate flag allows us to define the process, which is in this case, we're looking for a sudo, and the invest message, which we're looking for TTY in the case of like a terminal command. So here it shows like an instance in which actually on my device earlier today, in which I had actually killed the audio daemon because it was giving me issues. But this is just like an example of how it shows that instances of the sudo command being used, because that can instances of those may indicate attempts at privilege escalation. Next slide. So this one's similar, but more so like showing, in the last 20 minutes or so, showing more details with the info and debug flag, as well as looking specifically for the su command. And here it showed an instance of an attempt to use a super user, but it was not successful. It would also show successful attempts as well, if there are any, which is also for looking into privilege escalation or anything like that. Next is the login attempts. This one's a little bit more complicated because login can come from a multitude of places, but here we're looking for the lock screen in particular, and we're looking for instances of authentication successes or authentication failures, or anything with anything relating to login itself, or the beginning of the authentication and the end of authentication. So yeah, here is an example of that, and it shows an instance in which there was an incorrect password attempt. And it also shows an instance in where the password was actually correct and a successful authentication. So things like that. You can also see like attempts to like move around to different devices or things like that. any like sophisticated malware that's doing that sort of work. You could get more information that way. And also, these sorts of things can be turned into facts in Adigy itself, where you're able to get alerts for these kinds of attempts as soon as they happen, and just like checking like every 5 minutes or so to see if that's like if that sort of thing gets triggered. Next slide. So here, next we have the SSH attempts. So another means in which malware can try to get into your devices is through SSH if those things are enabled onto the device itself. macOS doesn't have this feature enabled by default, but some enterprises may have niche use cases where this may be required. And here we're looking for the process, specifically SSHD. And here we have one of the lines highlighted, which indicates that there was an attempt at this particular user from the IP address that's mentioned there, which looks like an internal IP address that may be relating to another device on the network. So that's also useful for forensics. And next, we have screen sharing. Screen sharing authentication requests. So screen sharing is one tool that we like to use for remoting into another device to see the desktop and do our normal operations outside of merely just a terminal environment. And there are, there is some interest if this is something that's being attempted on your device. And so you can actually check for incidents in which this sort of attempts were successful or have failed, and also get the IP addresses of which they're coming from as well. So similar idea with SSH. But yeah, that's it for in terms of logs that may be of interest to you for your investigation. This is not an exhaustive list, and there's quite a bit of like good information online regarding the Apple Unified Logging System that I would recommend. Particularly there is, let me see if I have it open here. I don't think I do, but there is a blogger that goes by the name of Mac4n6 or mac4n6.com that did a deep dive into some of the logs that can be produced for analysis or for security events, specifically with Apple Unified Logging System. Just put a link to their blog here because they're really useful in finding this kind of information. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking on mute here.
No, you're good.
I will say all these commands that you just showed, these log show commands, like they're really, really powerful, and you don't need to use them for security related incidents. You can use them for anything. We use them regularly to kind of figure out what the heck is going on macOS sometimes, because it's a bit of a mystery to everybody. Yeah. Now with that said, these are pretty advanced for an end user to run, but that doesn't mean they can't run them. What we do in our organization, and I'll show in here in a second, is we formulate. I know some of take this out of full screen mode. And some of these can be put into a script as self-service. So sometimes getting the end user to do stuff for us, or us having the time to do it real time, is challenging, right? So that's what the Adigy platform is here, does all this real time stuff. So like whether it runs through an alert, a monitoring item when some launch daemon or agent is checked, or maybe you set up some custom monitoring, or maybe even what we tell our users is, because I mean, to be frank, most of the security issues relate to a user doing something. 9 times out of 10, it's a user who clicked something or did something that they shouldn't have done, because the technology in general is pretty reliable. It does whatever the person, the nut behind the keyboard is doing. So let's say they do click something by accident. You can script all this in a script and make it available in self-service. You can press run and then just say, hey, you ever do anything you're not supposed to do, or you ever accidentally click something and you're worried about a security issue, just come in here, come to scripts, press, this button, and we'll take care of it. And the reason why we like this method is because we get the logs real time. Because sometimes logs disappear, sometimes the malware will cover up whatever it's doing. This gives us a direct avenue of real-timeness, like real-time activity of exactly what the user was doing at the time he clicked, or understood that he had a security issue. Now, what you do, you can obviously script out as much as you want in there. Now, obviously, if you want to put custom stuff, you can. I think this one that we're doing collects like all the running processes, sysdiagnose, does like a log stream and outputs the file. And then it'll also upload the files to our Slack. It'll notify the user here when it's done that we understood you had a security issue. It creates a ticket in the ticketing system. So you can get as creative as you want here. If you're interested in the script, let us know, and we can pass that over. And you see when it's finished, it says, you can customize the messaging as well. The security team notification, we received your security report and we reach out, you can put whatever custom messaging you want here, and then they can press OK. And then, that will create a ticket, upload the logs. I see someone asked, what platform would you recommend uploading these logs to? It's one thing to create the logs, but it's another thing to upload them to a place where we can access them without user interaction. Great question. That really is up to you. Some companies have real strict standards about where you can send data to. We actually have a KB article, and open it up right here. Adigy upload logs to Slack. So if you guys are a Slack shop or you use Slack and you want to do this, you can. We actually created this article and updated recently. I ignore the screenshots, but we updated recently to, essentially provide a new mechanism to upload these logs to Slack. Now, every platform or file provider, I'm going to send this to everybody here in the questions and answers if you're interested in this article, but you can also Google upload files from Slack. It walks you through kind of how to create a Slack app to upload the files to, and you pass it in the script. But obviously, as I was going, the file uploading platform is really up to you all and what you're allowed to use. We've seen S3, Amazon S3. You could potentially even use Dropbox or Box. I'm not 100% sure on those. I haven't used them in a while, but those would work too. I guess like it really depends on what you have access to, and if you have a file provider or a cloud file provider and you're not sure, submit a ticket. Say you were watching this webinar and you were just curious about like how to do it with this vendor. It may or may not be possible. It's hard to say for every single vendor out there, but we can definitely help. I see a couple requests for the script. We will get those over to you. I'm gonna just take notes of the email use. All right, and a few more people want the script. I'll even look at trying to put it in the community as a template. The challenge is it's not like a standard template for everybody, just copy and paste. Obviously, like you may want to add things or subtract things, so maybe a KB article with it as well. All right, I think we got everybody who requested the script. If you still want it, I see some others are doing it, asking for it as well. So we'll follow up with everybody who requested it. And if you didn't request it or you're watching this as a recording, go ahead and just create a support ticket so we don't lose track of it, and we'll get it over to you pretty quickly. All right, so we're about 5 minutes left. We're gonna go back here to our presentation and just open it up for questions and answers. I'm sorry we didn't leave much time, but I think we covered a lot of different topics. So is there any questions? Anybody want some answers? I see Ben, you asked some questions about erasing data. I'll have to look into those probably off the call because I'm not sure I know the answer to them. All right. Well, ask away. We'll be here for another 5 more minutes. If not, and you're gonna hop off, I see some people already hopping off. Have a great end of the year. Happy holidays to everybody. All that good stuff. Um, and whatnot. So we look forward to seeing you next year on our next pseudo talks. I see there is a question that just came in. Let's see if I can wrap my head around it. To confirm things like alerting, monitoring, fact changes. Those persist for a maximum of 90 days. Not quite sure what you mean by persist for a maximum of 90 days. Our system events store events for 90 days. But the facts, when they trigger an alert, the alert stays in perpetuity. I think that's the answer you're looking for. So even if you close the alert will always be there. And even if you close it, like you can see it historically. I'm not sure if that answers your questions. Oh, in the events dashboard, yeah, the events only last for 90 days. You can use the API to export them elsewhere, Slack, if you wanted to. We do that. You can do that with an API or Zapier, or some sort of middleware if you not don't want to set up an API stuff. But let me double check the monitoring. So if that means I can change up alerts for daemon agent changes and close them immediately, but then go into the device alert history and a year later and still see the alerts? Yes. For example, here's one of my devices from 2019, the alert from 3 years ago. So it'll give you the data point that triggered, and if there was a remediation like this, it will give you the details, if it had details. It was a pretty straightforward remediation. All right. I see the question about the login and having troubles logging in with FileVault. Submit a ticket if you don't mind, Nick. In reference that you were watching this webinar, you brought it up, and I told you to submit a ticket. They'll reach out to me. They're gonna look into this. I will say, like, I sent something to Mac admins today about this. Like, if FileVault tends to have problems logging people in if you don't have a secure token, you don't have volume ownership, and there's no admin on the machine. Those three are usually important and can cause issues. So like if something happens to one of those three, it could cause that behavior you're describing, but it's hard to know exactly what happened on the device without like looking at the logs and examining it. We can make up stories, but I don't know how much value that will add. So definitely submit a ticket with the devices and we'll grab the logs and take a look as to what's going on. We might need to take a look at the configuration. I think I see that the most with automated device enrollment, to be frank. Oh, great question, Ross. Yeah, you don't want to manually close the alerts by hand. I guess you could add a remediation script and an auto close based on the exit status you put. So just get the exit status right. I would say just be careful there because you can introduce like a loop, if you will, infinite loop of like the alert, the script running, alert generating, remediation running, resetting the alarm status, then it rerunning again. I think you're following where I'm going with this, but if you're not, let me know and we can talk about it more. All right. Was there any other questions, comments, concerns? We're almost at the top of the hour here, so just want to say thank you everybody for joining again. Really appreciate you guys, everything you do for the community. Look forward to having some of our community actually up here next year in 2023, and the Pseudo Talk shirt being a 2023 thing. So thank you all. Everybody have a great day, week, and end of the month here and end of the year. Happy holidays.